Hello, welcome to our next session, which is going to feature an amazing speaker, Bryan Welch. We'll introduce him in a moment. First, let's take a moment to transition into this particular session from the previous one, Cliff Smith, which was amazing. I hope you were there for that. So let's take a breath and just get present with what's going on for you now. We're all way too busy, devices and interruptions. And taking some time now to focus on some really useful information and expertise from some amazing people. It can be worth taking a moment just to gather your capacity to pay attention and transition. I often close my eyes, but everybody does this differently. Taking a few breaths and relaxing. Pressing pause on the flow of events in your life. Checking in with yourself. Just taking a few moments sometimes is so beneficial. It's the kind of thing you can do during the day, anytime. So with that, we'll bring Mark back out here. Hey, Mark.
Hello, hello. So I'm happy to introduce our next speaker. Let me help him get up stage here.
Yeah, so our next guest is really, he's one of the most potent forces and famous names in the field of mindfulness.
He serves as CEO of the media and training company Mindful Communications. You might have seen Mindfulness Magazine and mindful.org, the website, which is one of the most trusted sources for mindfulness content and services on the internet.
And they actually recently merged with a groundbreaking Life XT corporate training program to provide state-of-the-art training services to corporations and organizations.
So we're delighted to introduce Bryan Welch here. We'll wait for him to pop up and we'll continue from there. Here we go, Bryan. There you go. Stage is yours. You might also need to click the video button and the mic button if you have it. There we go.
All right. There we go. It's great to be here. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Mark. It's an honor and a privilege, and it should be fun to spend this time with you all. I've been noticing the amount of energy in this gathering and the extraordinarily astute and stimulating speakers. So I feel honored to be in this company. Thanks for having me. Gosh, certainty. I have a teacher who says certainty is aggression. And when I first stumbled across that, it was for me literally one of those moments where, you know, I initially rejected the idea and then sort of felt my mind getting blown by the idea. And as I considered it, I came to think that it's rather a profound idea, especially for people in business, for people in positions of leadership, where certainty is given a very high premium. You know, certainty is very often one of the criteria for judging the quality of an idea. But from a mindfulness perspective, you know, those of us who study the tremendous power we have over how we experience our lives. And those of us who apply ourselves to the study of our own perspective, our own reactions, it can be very difficult to create that kind of hard line around things. The certainty, is probably in some sense never warranted, because circumstances and our perspective are constantly changing. It's never probably been more obvious than today in the era of COVID, with rapidly accelerating technological change, cultural integration on a scale never before seen by our species, and cultural integration, inclusiveness, diversity, all give us a landscape of diverse perspectives, which in a way underwrites our understanding that the situation is fluid, and perspective makes ultimately a defining difference in how we and our colleagues and all other human beings experience the circumstances. A workforce today, I guess I've been in some executive position, usually a chief executive's position in small businesses, for 35 years or so. And I've seen the workforce's diversity increase dramatically over that time. Today in our workplace, we very likely to have possibly people from 4 different generations in terms of age, people from around the world, people from many diverse backgrounds in our own culture. And those, of course, lead to different perspectives. And perhaps unfortunately, the social media was invented in an era when we began to understand how we could draw a traffic to social media websites and other opinion-based websites based on some commonality of perspective. And I think that's accelerated division in our society. I think people now have media that serve their instinct to protect their perspective by hanging out, as it were, in a digital sense, with others who feel the same way they do. And I think it's really rather tragic the way that allows people to solidify their opinions, and in many cases, I think, to form stronger and stronger opinions, more and more extreme opinions. That's a huge challenge for managers of businesses, for people in positions of leadership within organizations. Because those divisions appear within the workplace. And of course, the integration of our efforts, our sense of joint purpose, is one of the most powerful things that it can exist in an organization. So folks who run organizations today face this extraordinary challenge in somehow resolving, or at least mitigating, the divisions between people that are created outside the workplace in most cases, but carried into the workplace, of course. It might be useful to remember that we are in modern organizations placed in the position of managing the most powerful engines driven by human energy in the history of the species. Business, in particular, is by far the most efficient and biggest aggregator of human energy and effort in the history of our species. It's orders of magnitude on a global scale larger and more powerful than any of the previous ways we used to organize human energy. Religion, feudal societies, tribal societies. Businesses harness the energy of human collaboration in an unprecedented way. But it's only really been done this way for about, somewhere between 250 and 300 years since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And so, as we get to talking about, business works this way or business works that way, I think it's a good idea to remember that we've only had this idea of business for a really small part of human history. And we're probably still in the early stages of learning how to do it. And by that, I mean, well, perhaps business is by right a vehicle for human conscience to a degree that up to this point it has not been. And so with that in mind, the idea of the workplace as a vessel for human collaboration starts to, I think, gain a kind of relevance to the situation we all find ourselves in the workplace today. Who wants certainty? Well, on one level, I think it's easy to see the ways in which certainty has an impact very similar to other forms of aggression. Absolute certainty sets one at odds with other versions of the truth. And that in and of itself is an aggressive act. But any of you who've led organizations, those of you maybe have raised money from investors, those of you who are serving customers, those of you who just are trying to maintain peace of mind and basic mental health of your workforce, will realize that really all of our stakeholder groups are asking us as leaders for certainty. But if we can envision a mode of leadership that can be decisive without certainty, without the need for certainty, then I think maybe we're beginning to touch on a new mode of leadership that's much more effective in a lot of ways. I think, the folks I know who exercise this kind of leadership most competently have discovered in their own organizations that simply by confessing the degree to which we are uncertain can draw our stakeholders to us in fascinating and valuable ways. Linked to that, of course, is the simple fact that we also have to be decisive, and that dithering over decisions doesn't serve anyone's interests. And so we're, I think, cast in a new, perhaps more humble role than the previous role of the all-seeing, all-knowing, insightful leader, in the role of someone whose service requires that they make decisions and whose basic awareness instructs us, that we can never be absolutely certain that that our decisions are the best ones. And there's an aspect of that provides a kind of fertilizer for a really fundamental sort of humility. The humility of the scope of our task. The uncertainty, and in some ways the impossibility of doing it in a perfect way. I'd like to encourage everybody at this point to jump in with questions anytime. You're not seeing any slides, and I'm not working from a script. It would be in a way sort of contradictory to talk about uncertainty with PowerPoint full of lists of certainties. And so in this case, I'm not. But, well, and for that reason, I'm interested in a conversation as much as y'all are. I see that Jan Mills is asking, what does a company most need to do to embrace the culture change required for a spirit of mindfulness? Well, it kind of raises the whole question of what a spirit of mindfulness is. When we talk about mindfulness in our business and in our magazine and our media, we generally talk about it as a set of practices and beliefs that allow us to, well, one way of describing it is to create some space between stimulus and response. That's sort of the breathe in, breathe out basic practice of mindfulness as we define it. And we don't really think there's any way of creating a culture of mindfulness without the practice of mindfulness. In our organization, we open meetings with usually with a period of silence, a period of meditation, and we offer several days a year to people for mindful activity, that is, going on retreat or just taking oneself on retreat for a few days at home. We pay any of our employees who wish to have mindfulness teachers. The company pays for that, or coaches. And we also generally pay for activities related to mindfulness when employees want to go, out on retreat to an event or something. So those are some of the ways we encourage it. I think from our perspective, and in direct answer to the question, we think of mindfulness as a set of practices more than a philosophy, as a set of practices more than outcomes. And those practices demonstrated over millennia that they can improve our emotional resiliency. They can improve the practice of our empathy and our ability to experience and show compassion to others. All things, I would argue, are really good things to have going on in your organization. There's another aspect, of course, to mindfulness, besides all that very sort of profound sounding stuff, that at the end of the day, I can think for me is maybe even more profound. I had the experience when I was in college. I commuted by bus to school and back. And, my schedule would change every semester. And for one semester, I happen to just seem to just have exactly the same schedule as another student. And she and I were at the bus stop the same time almost every day for however long the semester was, 3 months or whatever. We got to where we always greeted each other, but we never, I think, actually introduced ourselves. It only, this, almost daily meeting lasted for only a semester. But I was struck at the end of the semester when our schedules changed at the kind of friendliness I felt toward her and the warmth that I sensed there. And I've thought that the practice of mindfulness, the practice of meditation, is kind of an analogous experience in which we on a regular basis spend time with ourselves and have a chance to develop, for lack of a better word, friendliness toward ourselves. And that's, I think, a quality that's absolutely imperative to leading in an environment of uncertainty. Certainly an imperative to being decisive in a state of vulnerability and uncertainty. Because that friendliness, without it, it's very easy to just get frozen in anxiety. I think I, for a long time, countered my anxiety by talking myself into some kind of certainty and then foisting it upon everybody around me. And I'm still inclined to go about it in that heavy-handed way. But my ideal for how we do what we do has changed. And I guess if I were going to encapsulate it, my ideal is to be as decisive as ever, but in an open and vulnerable state of uncertainty, acknowledging how little we ultimately know and that we're making our best guesses all the time. Jim Davis, hi Jim, asks, what do you think drives the need for leaders to have certainty? And how do you think technology shapes the pace in which decisions are made? Great questions, Jim. I mean, everybody's driving leaders toward certainty a lot of the time. I think, for entrepreneurs, which is basically the kind of business person I've been most of the time, the way that one funds entrepreneurial ventures, where you create a business plan with 5-year revenue projections and you describe your products and how they're going to evolve and how you're going to diversify. I have a friend, an entrepreneur friend, who says that that almost no living thing has a lifespan shorter than a business plan after you fund it, because the world immediately gets involved. And so it's a sort of interesting dance, because experienced entrepreneurs know how uncertain that kind of business planning is, to start something from scratch that doesn't exist and then predict how big it's going to be, what business it's going to be, and how it's going to behave and perform years in the future. But it's part of the process of getting funded to speak with great certainty, or typically at least it is, and to assert a level of knowledge about the future of your enterprise that by some standards is not really very realistic. But, it's kind of an exercise that can help you convince investors of your enthusiasm, your energy, your drive. And, you need to be able to paint a picture. You need to be able to visualize success. And so there's a lot of pressure from shareholders. Employees want to know that they're going to be valuable on an ongoing basis to the organization. They want to know the definitions of success and failure for them. They'd like to know precisely what the standards for success and failure are, and how they might grow in their jobs. And a lot of those things are very hard to say because our businesses are changing rapidly in the real world, in a fluid environment. But our employees would like things to be a lot more certain sometimes than they are. And of course, all the external stakeholders, customers, vendors. I think in an executive position, most people probably feel significant pressure to perform with certainty, or at least to project certainty. And it's a more nuanced and somewhat more, I think, more difficult task to communicate the wisdom of our actions in a way that doesn't project certainty on them. What was the second half of Jim's question? Help me out, Mark. I can't recall. There we go. Oh, gee whiz, technology shaping the way decisions are made. Well, I think we conveniently forget sometimes how many businesses that looked really, 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 really similar to Amazon there were before, that launched before and launched after Amazon did. This kind of common gospel of the business media is that Amazon is the Leviathan that it is today. Boy, I guess Amazon and Leviathan don't exactly go together, but you get my drift. It's this global force. And the story that gets projected into, in the media is so often that's because they did it better than anybody else, because the people who started it were geniuses. But, I would argue that there were 1,000 great Amazons before Amazon that showed up a little early, and 1,000 great Amazons before Amazon that showed up a little late, and that luck plays a big role in our success or our failure. It's very unmotivating it can be unmotivating to go around thinking that way. One needs to believe in the quality of one's actions. But the fact of the matter is, tech changes so much on a daily basis, and new ways of doing what we are doing evolve, and the degree to which we've invested in the old ways of doing things is a hindrance to doing things in new ways. I'm just imagining, my company does corporate training. We were lucky in that we started delivering that corporate training via video call a few years ago. And that was always part of our vision, our strategy. And it was just barely possible when we started. But of course, the technology of communicating in the way that you and I are communicating now has advanced very rapidly, and in some ways arrived on the scene just about exactly in time for COVID and all the challenges that were presented by a global pandemic. And so, in a way, Jim, it's a question very relevant to the central topic here, because being certain of that our way of doing something is the best way of doing something might inhibit us from adapting to a new way of doing something. While on the other hand, if we're not able to embrace some level of decisiveness, and if we're not able to detach from the uncertainty emotionally, then we might not make decisions rapidly enough to keep up. So we can't get frozen in place. But on the other hand, we have to commit on a daily basis. And a lot of that instability is driven by the impossibility of knowing what's going to be technologically possible next week, not to mention next year or in 5 years. I hope that answers the question. Alfred Ramirez asks, have you seen mindful practitioners operating at different speeds than their colleagues and demonstrating different leadership or team member practices? If so, how do you mesh, integrate with the others, set the stage for all being on a similar page? Well, I think maybe rather than synchronizing, I don't know whether the implication is that mindfulness practitioners might be faster or slower than people who aren't practitioners. I think my own aspiration for the practice is that it helps us speed up or slow down as needed to mesh with those around us, so we can can achieve a sort of maximum effectiveness in the environment where we find ourselves. There is a notion out there, of course, that practitioners, that meditators might be sort of dreamy or detached, and I think it probably is the opposite in my experience, that serious practitioners have enhanced powers of concentration, focus, better listening skills. I hope that what we can achieve through practice is an improved ability to synchronize with those around us so that we can hear them more clearly and interact with them more fruitfully. And yeah, I guess I would say that that's what I've seen in the mindfulness practitioners who've most impressed me, especially in a working environment, is an ability to adapt, an ability to modulate their pace, the pace of their thinking and communication. And I think an ability to inhabit their working roles in very humane, warm, friendly ways. I think. Certainly, I think that's among my own aspirations for my practice, is that I can become more adept in those ways. I started, well, it's been a focus for me, and I continually discover new, my own shortcomings and new possibilities for mitigating those shortcomings. And Irvine Fox, I apologize for not knowing how to pronounce your first name, but she asks, I'm seeing a rise of intuition development for leaders. What are your thoughts on intuition development for leadership to increase decisiveness and uncertainty? Yeah, I think incredibly valuable. What a great topic. I'm really glad you brought it up. And I'm somewhat skeptical of some of the ways in which people attempt to teach intuition. Most of what we've seen in terms of data around that indicates that all human beings have sort of phenomenal powers of intuition. I mean, there must be some exceptions. When I say all human beings, that's pretty sweeping and rather certain statement. But I think the vast majority of people have powers of intuition of which they're unaware. And, from personal experience, and I imagine most of y'all share some of this in your own experience, it's when I have an aversion to what I'm perceiving that I tend not to perceive it as clearly as I should. We avoid acknowledging the truth that confronts us if it's an unpleasant truth to us. And, what we hope is that by acknowledging that and through mindfulness practices and by focusing on it, that we can level off our attraction and aversion to things in order so that we can see more clearly. And I think that's where the rubber really meets the road there, is when we talk about intuitive decision making. We talk about intuition, we talk about empathy, which is so closely related to that. We try to train people and we try to practice in such a way that our intuition can remain active even under stress, even when we're confronting very unpleasant realities. And so, I'd say again that it's in that sense of space that we hopefully can create through our study and our practice that allows us to stay open to the myriad information we're able to perceive. And I think, that's the vast majority of people. I am suspicious of some more very literal methods of teaching, quote unquote, teaching intuition, because many of them don't seem to focus on the perceiver's state of mind. That is, when we're practicing intuition, our own state of mind, which seems to me to be the biggest variable in our ability to deploy our intuitive powers. Hope that answered the question. Barbara McEvely asks, what was my own personal journey that led me to mindfulness? Well, my mom was a meditator, and looking back on, was really sort of she was a very unusual sort of person. And, we lived in the desert in southern New Mexico in a rather poor community. But she picked up a book somewhere and decided that it was an enhancement to her life. And so she tried to teach my brother and me, and that was a taste. I got involved with the Quakers when I was a young adult, and that's a contemplative group of people, nominally Christian, and their meetings were silent, and really, it's group meditation, and I found nourishment there. But a few years ago, I got interested in compassion. I had written a book called Beautiful and Abundant about sustainability and about the need for positive visions of a human future. And in the process, I felt sort of overwhelmed by the challenge of bringing people together to work on these common problems. All of our problems that are related to sustainability are pretty much global, and their solutions pretty much boil down to whether we can collaborate with each other successfully. And I felt like, our ability to exercise our sort of extraordinary human gift for compassion was going to be a primary variable in our ability to survive. And in fact, it thrilled me to think that compassion was a primary evolutionary variable for our species. There is no other species, so far as we know, that can feel compassion toward other creatures they'll never meet, other species, future generations. That's really us. And so it's sort of thrilling that our capacity for that might be a linchpin in our efforts to survive and to create prosperity for future generations. So anyway, I had this idea, sat down to write a book about compassion, and discovered I didn't really know much about it, and I wasn't very good at it. I couldn't speak about it authoritatively at all, and that set me on a kind of an adventure, looking for people who understood it better than I did. And that led me to mindfulness practice pretty directly. And then two sort of catastrophic events in my life. My son died after 5 years of pretty severe drug addiction and suffering. And a new business I cared a lot about, failed. And I had to fold it. And of course, the worst of those two was obviously the loss of my son. But coming as they did a couple of years apart, I discovered I needed to learn how to exercise compassion toward myself in ways that I didn't have control, I couldn't do. And so that created a situation in which mindfulness practice became immensely valuable, a really life-saving thing in my life. It also awoke in me kind of realization that as long as I had a bunch of little narratives running in my head about how I was safe from this or safe from that because I was superior or special, and I had hundreds of those narratives that I used to insulate me from all the things I was we are vulnerable to, human suffering. When I was using those narratives and when I was insulating myself from that suffering, I was also isolating myself from people who were suffering. And if there was one, if you could, the simplest way I have to describe the most impermeable barrier I had created to exercising empathy safe. And so in the experience of really not safe in a way that is undeniable, opened my heart, broke it, opened it. And so me, a big focus of my mindfulness practice is trying to maintain that openness the best I can. Thanks for asking. Do we have any other questions, or did I just deliver a pedagogical buzzkill?
On the contrary, Brian, I think that put us square into heartfulness. And, it's a big field of open and compassion. I mean, I love it. It's just so grounded in the truth of your experience of deep personal exploration and growth, and it really landed at me. So thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
Such a warm conversation, and we're all lucky to have you as a leader in our world today. We need more leaders like yourself that are leading from the heart. So I really appreciate you doing what you do. And thank you very much, Bryan, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
It's a gift to the world that you're the guy who's having such an influence on so many. And so thank you for that.
So that pretty much wraps up our session here. Bryan, do you have any final?
Oops. Sorry, I'll bring him back. He's coming back.
Well, I would just say thank you for having me. It's, you guys have been super generous, and it's such a cool thing that the Future is Mindful is doing. I'm grateful to be part of it, and yeah, thanks for all the work you're doing. Deeply appreciate it.
It's a privilege.
Do you have any things where you'd like people to check out that you're currently working on? Any main things that you'd like for people to check out, connect with you on LinkedIn or anything like that?
Oh, by all means, please connect with me on LinkedIn or mindful.org. And it's thrilling to connect with people who are interested in these things. So I hope some of you have time to reach out. And if we were going for cocktails, as we would in the old-fashioned conference days, I would be looking forward to hanging out and having a few with you. But as it is, we have to be more conscious about it. So please reach out. I'll look forward to it.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Bryan.
Wow, that's so excellent. I just can't get over that story and the framing and his whole, really, really well considered and embodied approach to uncertainty and decisiveness. And, he runs a really complex series of organizations. And so when he starts talking about how to balance decisiveness and uncertainty, I'm going to pay attention. It's because he knows something about that. It's just a real gift to hear from him.
So we have before our next session, which is a wellness experience. Brett, correct me if I'm wrong on the agenda here, but we have an hour of networking coming up. And before we release everybody to the lounge, we have a couple housekeeping announcements to make that I imagine could be beneficial for people here. I'm just going to mention that we released the top 2022 workplace mindfulness resources on our website. It's not perfect. We would love for you to submit yourself as a resource. If you send us an email at team@thefutureismindful.com, we will get you on that website, especially if you have services in the space. These individuals here are also up there as a resource. If you're a facilitator, we'd love to promote you. If you've got a book relevant, we'd love to have you up there. So let us know about that. It's if you go to thefutureismindful.com, there's a resources button up top, and we will promote you up there. Brett.
Right. So next up is our wellness experiences, and we have 3 different wellness experiences to choose from, which I have on the screen here. Now, these are not on AirMeet, so you will have to go to either the futureismindful.com/Terran or the futureismindful.com/Immerse or the futureismindful.com/Focus, depending on which of these you would care to attend. And they will last, they're only half an hour, but they're amazing. We have really great facilitators for these, which you can see here. And so that's what's going on. And then after that, we'll be doing a networking session for I'm just going to double check because I'm wondering if I've got the right timing here.
So the networking session is going to happen for the next hour, and then we'll get
Okay,
it.
thank you, Mark. I just had a.
So don't click on those links yet.
Don't click on the
We'll put
links.
that up and let you guys go there. I'm super excited for all of these wellness experiences. I'm sure we could all use.
Yeah.
We can practice and exercise. We can put mindfulness into practice. So excited for that. And now, Brett, if you don't have anything else to say, we can end it.
We're done.
Connect
Thank you.
further.
Thank you, Neil. Bye.